Good morning and welcome to our webinar. This is how to do business with the government. This is part of a monthly series that we've been putting on here at Norcal PTAC with our procurement specialists. We're really excited to have Thomas Burns, returning champion of the introduction webinars, back today. My name is James Forrest. I am a program coordinator and procurement specialist at Norcal PTAC. I'm going to hand things over to Thomas very briefly. Just want to talk about what PTAC means. There's a lot of acronyms get thrown around in the sort of government contracting adjacent world. PTAC stands for Procurement Technical Assistance Center. There's a bunch just in California alone. You can see this colorful map here, all the PTACs in California. We're the one in green in the upper left, or the Northwest as we call it in map world. So these are our 15 counties in the upper left, but there's tons of other PTACs. So if you're not in our service area, you'll be in another PTAC service area. In fact, there's 96 across the country. So if you're not in California at all, don't worry, you're probably in the jurisdiction of another PTAC. And if you're in no PTAC's jurisdiction, there are also PTACs that can help pick up the slack there as well. So basically, what do PTACs do? We help small businesses succeed in the government marketplace. That's what we do. We don't help with general business assistance. We don't help with startups and loans. We zero in and focus on how to get you ready to get contracts. And when we say government, we don't just mean the federal government. We mean the feds, state, local, so county, city, public utilities, tribal, Native American tribal entities. There's all kinds of government entities that we can assist you with. And everything we do is free, so we don't charge you anything. I know some PTACs charge a nominal fee for the use of the bid match service. We do not. We get our funding from federal, state, and local grants and contracts. And this is a fun little fact here. In fiscal year 21, PTACs served over 56,000 clients that year and helped them win more than $24 billion in government contracts and subcontracts. Our share of that is pretty healthy for a small little partial state PTAC. We have about $500 million in 2021 that we helped our clients win. That's a lot of tax dollars going back into the pockets of small businesses. So we're pretty excited about that, and we're passionate about helping the little guys compete. So we are the Northern California Procurement Technical Assistance Center. We do a similar service to the rest of the PTACs. Each PTAC is independently operated. So we don't have we have a funding agreement with the DLA, but we all do things in our own way. What we do, what all PTACs do, is one-on-one counseling. That's kind of the bread and butter of what we do. So we have a team of procurement specialists, and in our case, they can meet with you remotely to go through just about any process related to selling your goods and services to the government. So whether it's getting registrations, getting certified, small business, minority-owned, disabled veteran business-owned, things like that, actually finding opportunities, bidding on them, how to stay compliant, you name it, we do it, as long as it's related to procurement. And we can also set you up with a custom bid matching profile. That thing is pretty neat. Basically what it does is it scrapes the internet, all these different procurement databases, and it puts a platter of opportunities in your email inbox every morning for you to click on. So that's pretty neat. It's based on criteria that you work out with your procurement specialist. So that's a good thing to ask your counselor about if you haven't already, if you're working with our PTAC. And then since you all know, since you're here today, we like to put on webinars. So we put on a pretty regular dose of webinars. It's been averaging almost one a week through the spring here. We're going to slow down a little bit through the summer, but we'll talk about some of our upcoming webinars at the end of this presentation. But these are always free to join. And unlike our other services, the first two services are for clients. And clients have to be having a principal location of their business in one of these green counties on the map here, these 15 counties in Northern California. If you are not in this location, in this service area, you should apply for another PTAC. If you submit an application to ours, we will redirect you to someone else. However, you can join our webinars from anywhere. You don't need to have a business. You don't need to be even in the country. So all are welcome. If you're interested in any of this, the webinars, the counseling, go ahead and sign up. Sorry, some dogs are happening. You can sign up on our website, norcalptac.org, and if you're not in our service area, you'll find that second link there will be for finding your local PTAC. Again, apologies about the dogs. some of the scourge of working from home. Okay, and this is just a list of some of the opportunities, the things that PTAC helps with. SAM registration, certifications, capability statements. I've mentioned some of these, so we'll move on. Next, we're going to hand things over to Thomas Burns, and not a moment too soon with these little rat dogs yelling. Thomas is one of our excellent procurement specialists, and you're in great hands with him, so go ahead and take it away, Thomas.
Okay, sorry about that. It took me a minute to click over. Hold on. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Good morning, everybody. My name is Thomas Burns. I'm one of the procurement specialists with Norcal PTAC. Quick disclosure, the information provided here is accurate to the best of my ability at the time of this presentation. Some or all of the information that is mentioned here could or might change by tomorrow, with or without prior notice. So just understand that this information is updated to the best of our ability. Okay, next slide. There we go. So we already talked about what is the PTAC program. So we're going to jump into what is government contracting. We're also going to talk about today how to determine if selling to the government is right for you. And this is really big for those who are, very new to government contracting. They're not sure if what they sell or their services they offer are even used by the government or purchased by them. So we'll try to cover that. How to get started, the correct marketing strategy or the way to market to the government, where to find your bid opportunities, and steps for success. And again, as James mentioned, if you have any questions at any point, you can put them in the Q&A, and we'll stop after a slide to try to answer them if they're relevant to what we're talking about. Okay, so what is government contracting? So on the left side here, we're looking at the appropriate industries for government contracting. And what this means is the normal, or what we would call the bulk of what the government would be purchasing. So A&E is architecture and engineering, i.e. construction. Public works is the roads, buildings, bridges. Professional services is a kind of catch-all phrase for most things that are related to services. Everything from marketing services to accounting services, legal services. Anything in that professional service area is just lumped under professional services. Office supplies kind of speaks for itself. Janitorial, again, a very large category or industry that all government agencies utilize at some point. That's one of the most popular fields to be into when it comes to government contracting, is in the janitorial. Also, medical supplies and technology, transportation, logistics is another wide term. So it's everything from local delivery services to transportation of, by ship, by rail, by air, fire suppression services. Here in California, of course, CAL FIRE spends a great deal of money buying products and services to cover a wide variety of things that they need to be effective in fire services here in California. But on the federal side, there's also the forestry services, and then of course, defense. And then on the right side, those kinds of industries that typically aren't utilized within any kind of government entity. As you see, restaurants, bars, entertainment, well-being, holistic health. These are things that your tax dollars normally wouldn't go to purchase. And I like this slide here. This is a Pelican Bay State Prison, which is a state prison in Northern California. Now, this just gives you a snapshot of what a city, a county, a school district, the state of California, and in many ways, the federal government would purchase. So based on the slide I just talked about, here's a really good example that covers everything from public works, construction, defense, janitorial, and all the different services and all the different products that they purchase. So I'll leave it here for a second, just so people can really understand. It's a wide variety of things they purchase. And the key is to figure out where you fit, whether it's within the state. For example, in California, there are 230 state agencies, and each one has a different mission. And so what they need to purchase and how often is different than maybe another agency. Same with cities within California, and then the counties. And then of course, on the federal level, this is just multiplied by a factor of 100. Next. So this is an example of a structure that's put in place for large projects, right? The government agency is creating a building, and they're going to work with one prime company who's going to be in charge of the total building. That's everything from the development of the land, the structure, the feasibility reports, even some of the outreach to the community to let them know what's about to happen. And so the prime is actually the one charged with working with the smaller businesses or subcontractors to get certain sections of this large project done. And this is just a typical structure and one way that small businesses have an opportunity to work on large projects. So let's talk about the recipe for success. These are the things that are critical before you start the process of saying, I'm ready for government contracting. Of course, you have to have an established business. Now, what this means really, in what I want to say that in real time is, if you started your business or if you created your business entity, i.e. a sole prop or LLC or corporation a week ago, and you don't have any performances yet to show to the government, that might be a challenge in getting that first contract. However, if you have 20 years past experience in that industry, whatever that industry is, then you can still qualify, and they would be excited about your expertise and experience. So being established just means having that experience. The government is risk adverse. They're not looking to award a contract to a company with no history whatsoever. Second, having a business plan that includes government contracting. This is important because you don't want your business plan to be totally 100% government contracting as a startup entity. You should have a mix of government contracting along with, the private enterprise. Financial stability. This is important because when we talk about government contracting, we're talking about you do the work or you supply the product and then payment is awarded later. It could be 7-day net, 15, 20, 30, 45, 60, even up to 90 days in some situations. That's not the normal, of course. Net 20 to 30 is a normal. So you've got to be able to support other business functions, i.e. if you have employees or if you're purchasing product, you got to purchase that product, deliver it, and then wait on payment. Past performance, I kind of touched on that already. The government's risk adverse. So they want to do business with companies that already have some type of, they can prove some past performance. Market research. This is really the key recipe for success, in my opinion. making sure you understand where you're going to have the greatest chance of success when you're starting off with government contracting. You know, after 5, 10 years or 3, 4 years into this industry of selling your product or service to the government, you know, it can be wide open. But where do you start? Do you start with the city that's within the city you live in? Do you start with that county? Are you going to start going after maybe school districts or a transportation? Or is there something in your marketing research that tells you you should just go directly towards, let's say, the DOD or Department of Transportation or another large entity? Marketing research will let you know where you should really start, and that's the key. And then e-commerce capable, is your website set up so that it's going to be attractive to government buyers? Any questions at this point?
Hi, Thomas. Yes, we have a couple questions. The first is a sole prop business license enough to start? Is there any other registration needed? Until that's going to depend on what they mean by start.
So a sole prop is a business entity. Now, a sole prop, yes. So depending on the county you're in, they may require another type of business license, but being a sole proprietor is enough to get started in government contracting. Yes.
But it's enough to get you to the starting line, right? But then
yes,
typically
it is.
you need to, if you want to do business with the feds, you need to get registered in SAM. Every county has their own registration.
Everything you want to do, you can do that with as a sole prop.
Right. Yeah. It'll get you to the starting line. All right. Thanks, Thomas. James is asking, when it comes to minority certification, is one certification preferred over the other? It's another good question.
It's a difficult question based on what agency we're talking about. So if we're talking about the federal government, I can give you a breakdown on that. If we're talking about the state of California, there's really just 2 certifications that they award: a small business and a disabled veteran business enterprise. And then, of course, on the local level, counties and cities, they have their own, a generic term would be local business enterprise, an LBE. And most cities and counties have their own LBE certifications. So I can't really answer that question. It's based on where you want to focus your attention. Was it with some cities, counties, the state, or on the federal side?
All right.
But we even have webinars, and there's a lot more information we can get into to answer that question on a specific level. But to say that there's one that's preferred over another, then I would say no.
Mm-hmm. All right, good answer. Brandy's asking, typically do agencies buy from a website or come into a brick and mortar location?
Typically website. Typically website.
Fuad is saying, I'm a broker. I sell primarily into DECA and the exchanges. Do I need licensing, or is getting my SAM enough to sell?
You must have a SAM registration to do business with the federal government. You do not need a SAM registration to do business with cities, counties, school districts, the state of California. It's not required. But having a SAM registration is a valuable registration to get, though. I think we should keep moving. We could, because I think we'll start to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, these are good questions. Keep them coming.
Okay, so how to get started. So we've talked about signing up for services with your local PTAC. The reason you want to do that is we walk you through all of this so that you don't make the little or small mistakes that cost you time or money. Of course, you have to choose your NAICS or UNSPSC codes. And now a little bit about those. So NAICS codes And UN SPSC codes essentially help the government figure out what industry you're in. So these codes make it easy to identify an industry or a product. While I don't know them, my memory, of course, I've got, pages and pages of NAICS codes and UN SPSC codes that tell me what everything is. But as an example, if you're in the marketing services, I believe the NAICS code starts with a 5-4 and it's 54121 or something like that. That helps the government identify your industry. Now, the difference with the UN SPSC codes is that's a fairly new code system setup, and it's not used by the federal government, but it is definitely used by the state of California. So California Department of General Services, they use that exclusively, and some cities and counties in California also use UN SPSC codes. But the most prominent one are the NAICS codes. And then when you register on Cal eProcure, that is for the state of California. So if you're looking to do business with the state of California, you definitely have to become a vendor on Cal eProcure. And if you're looking to be a vendor with the federal government, you have to register on sam.gov. And with that, you're also going to complete your dynamic small business search. That allows the buyers within the federal government, if they're looking for products or services, they can use this database, this small business database that's managed by the Small Business Administration, to find your firm. And it allows you to add your narrative, keywords, and your past performance, along with references if you'd like to do that. And then creating a capability statement, which is a business card for your company. It's the first document most buyers within the government want to see. And later on in this webinar, we're going to show you what that looks like. And then, of course, making sure your website is government friendly, and we'll also cover that. Okay, so certifications. So we had the question about certifications. And so this kind of clears it up a little bit more. In the state of California, I still, there are 3, but the public works one is a little different. It just means you are a small business, but just in public works, i.e. construction. And then, of course, the disabled veteran business enterprise and the small business certification. In the state of California, what this certification allows you to do is you receive a preference. If I'm a certified small business in the state of California, and I'm bidding on a proposal for, and my bid, let's say my bid is $100,000 on computers that they want to buy. And another company who's not a small business, they bid, and their bid is also $100,000. The way the preference works is I get a 5% preference, which means that they deduct 5% off of my $100,000 bid, which makes it $95,000. So I would win the bid because I'm the lowest bid, but the government will pay me at the $100,000 bid that I put in. That's one of the advantages of having that certification. Another reason you want to get a certification is when there's a large project that the state puts out. Again, that example of a building. They're going to mandate that whoever the prime is that wins that contract, they have to award 10%, 20%, 30%. They change the value based on the contract, but they have to award a certain percentage to certified small businesses or certified DVBE businesses to receive that award once they've been awarded. So that's another way to have an access and how the certification can help you get more business with the state. And on the federal side, these are the listed certifications. And there's not one that's, quote, better than the other. However, I will say this, based on statistics, the federal government, their mandate is 25% of their total budget. So let's say the total budget for the federal government to purchase products and services is $700 billion in a year. 25% of that has to be spent with these certified small businesses that's listed. You have the SB, woman-owned small business, veteran-owned, historically hub zone, 8A, and DBE. The only one missing here is there's also a designation for Native American tribes. But all of that is 25%. And the classification of small business or small disadvantaged businesses actually gets the bulk of it. If 25%, you look at that as a whole, 100%, they might get 30 to 40% of that. But the only reason they do is because there's a bigger pool of self-certified small businesses. The woman-owned, the veteran-owned, historically hub zone, 8A, and the DBE, they have to apply for that. It's a process. It's free, of course, but you have to apply and go through a screening process to receive that certification. The small business certification is a self-certifying one when you sign up under sam.gov. Any questions on this? I don't know if I explained it without making it even more confusing.
We've got a question here about the MBE certification and how that fits in.
Yeah, okay. So the MBE is a minority business enterprise certification. And as far as I know, the only entity that awards that certification is the California Public Utilities Corporation, or California PUC. And they're over the utility companies, the water companies, the utility companies, the phone companies. That's where that certification plays a role, not with the state of California and not with the federal government.
All right, and that's it. And yeah, so it's kind of a pseudo.
It's a California certification, but it applies just to the California PUC, and the organizations that recognize the MBE are the water companies, utility companies, and phone companies.
Great. Brandy's asking here, on the capability statement, should you list the highest UNS PSC code or the full 8-digit drill down?
Let's go to that. Let me answer that when we get to that page.
Great.
Because I think I can show you better than kind of explain it.
All right. And Shaylin is asking, where do you complete the dynamic small business profile you talked about?
So normally, when you get to the end of your application within sam.gov, there is a link that takes you directly to that SBA, Small Business Administration, that dynamic tool, that dynamic database. At this moment, that link is missing. And as far as I know, unfortunately, I don't know how to get access to edit your information in that database currently. I'm assuming they're going to fix that within weeks. That's my hope. And you'll have access to that. But normally it's in the sam.gov application on the last page.
I know where to find that. We actually did a webinar on it using the GLS, the login system.
Really?
At Subnet. So
okay.
I'll post a webinar link for that, how to do that.
Yeah, because it's challenging if you don't have that specific link.
The link makes it easy, yeah, but you can get in there without going through SAM. There's a workaround. So we have more questions about the minority owned business certification. The small disadvantaged business certification, actually. If you could comment on what that is. SDB
Oh, the
is listed on
SDE.
here, yeah.
So
Self-certification, right?
I think so, and the reason I'm saying I think because there is a total small business and a small disadvantaged business. It must relate to, because it's a self-certifying certification, meaning when you go through the sam.gov application, there is a page that asks you what is your minority status, and it gives the different classifications, and then it talks about your economic level. And based on that, if it's under, and it doesn't give a definite dollar amount. So it doesn't say if your firm is only generating this amount, you're a small disadvantaged business over a small business. It doesn't state clearly in the application where that falls. And to be perfectly honest with you, I don't see a difference with contracting officers on whether they're going to use the SB or the SDB.
Yeah.
In their eyes, it's all one certification, SB.
Yeah, I just did some research on this, and the SDB used to have some teeth. It used to have goals associated with it, but basically the Supreme Court struck down all the requirements. So now it is kind of an empty certification.
Right.
You can self-certify as SDB, but it doesn't mandate, nobody's mandated to give any sort of percentage of contracts to SDBs. The criteria for self-certifying are the same for SDB as they are for the 8A contract. So you can basically copy and paste all the certification requirements from the 8A program, which is another minority business program that's listed here.
Right.
All right, let's keep it moving along. Sound good?
Okay.
All right, we nailed all the questions, so thanks, Thomas.
All right, local contracting, a great way to get your feet wet. I completely agree with this statement. Going into the federal market space can be extremely daunting, very challenging, because it's such a huge, the federal government is so much bigger than cities, counties, school districts, everything here locally. It is a much easier way to go to get your feet wet, to focus on your local city or your local county or school districts within a maybe 50-mile radius or 100-mile radius of where you're actually, where your place of business is. So I definitely would say that that's the way to go if this is your initial foray into contracting, government contracting. Now, they do use their own procurement systems. Each one is different or a little different. And so there's a learning curve. The city of Oakland is going to do things a little bit different than the city of San Francisco. The certifications might be a little bit different, although the application process is always the same. It's free. You never are charged anything to receive a local business enterprise certification. But how they utilize that certification, or how relevant is it within each of these cities or counties, depends on those cities and counties or school district, or of course the state of California. Now, when you go to our website, norcalptac.org, we actually provide a list of local cities, local counties, and transportation agencies here in Northern California. And we provide a link that goes directly to their procurement page. Sometimes that procurement page can be buried in a county website, right? You've got to find the How to Do Business with Us page. And then from there, you've got to figure out where is the actual page that I can start the application to be a vendor. We provide that information on our resource page under local contracting to make that part a little bit easier.
I dropped a link in the chat for that page. And just a quick note that Thomas is going to be putting on a local contracting webinar on July 7th. So same day of the week, same time. So please tune in for that as well.
Okay, so capability statement. Now, the next slide coming up, I'm going to actually have an example of what one looks like, but I just want to stop here for a quick second and just cover the main topics of what is on your capability statement and the rules of it. It's a one-page document, front and back. It's a resume for your business. I look at it as a really good snapshot business card. But the most important reason it even exists, government buyers and government managers and the admin and the people within government decided a while ago, a long time ago, they wanted a simple tool that can help them understand what you sell, who you are, your past performance, and your codes, your NAICS codes, we used to have SIC codes, those are gone now, and your certifications. And they wanted it to be clear, but also professional. And so they came up with this kind of system. Let me jump to it. So on the left side is front page and the right side is the back page. And as you can see on the left side, on the left of the left side, how that line kind of separates it, it makes it very easy for the government buyers to read this and understand exactly who you are and what you do. You have a quick paragraph that highlights, your company, what you stand for, and some other information about your core competencies. And then you break it down exactly. What do I sell, or what are my services? What makes me different? Who my key clients are? And then it goes into your past performance, which goes on to page 2, and then bios if you want to have that. But the other thing they're really concerned with is all that information under the company snapshot, right? When you were established, your EIN, your cage number. Cage code is a federal designation you receive once you sign up under sam.gov. DUNS number still applies, even though the federal government doesn't use it. The states, cities, and counties still utilize it. PSC is a product service code, which is another federal code. And then you have your GSA schedule, which is another federal thing that doesn't apply to states, cities, and counties. And then your codes. And so the question was, how do you list your codes? So right here, you would list the actual code and then the title. So hopefully that answers that one person's question. You only want to list the codes that are relevant to exactly what you're trying to sell within this capability statement. A good example, let's say I am in the service business. I'm a consultant. I can consult on marketing strategy, business plans, but I also do community outreach. I also have a team that goes out in the community and we deliver messages or information for government entities. In my case, I would want to create 2 capability statements, one that focuses on community outreach and one that focuses on marketing, advertising, sales, and business plan services, because those are all kind of key related to each other. So you don't want to have one capability statement with a list of 10 or 20 codes that are all over the place. You want to break this down so that your capability statement is focused on a specific industry or service or product. Any questions about the capability statement? Did I answer that question for the one person that had it?
I certainly hope so. I don't see any questions. We did have some questions on where to find it. I've dropped that link in the chat, so you should all have it.
Okay.
A lot of this is under the resources tab on our website, which is, if I may say so myself, pretty darn helpful. So check out that resources tab.
All right. And we'll jump into contracting ready websites. So this is what we're talking about. Of course, it's updated and relevant, and you want to have your own government tab, right? So on the top of a website, you've got your About Us, maybe a products and services page, maybe even a testimonial page, how to order page. So you also want to have a government page, and how you state that, it could be just federal, state, or it could just say government, but you want to let the government know that you are definitely advertising and marketing your services to them. And then on that page is where you can have your capability statement as a PDF file. You also list all of your registrations and certifications, your codes. You can also include any of your most recent projects, your past performance, whether it's your own personal expertise and experience or your company's. And then, of course, easy navigation, which is part of the whole marketing to the government, right? Having a marketing plan basically means, okay, so what's my budget? Let's say your budget is no more than a couple $100 a month just for marketing to the government. So what can I do with that budget? I may not be able to market to 10 different federal agencies and 20 different state agencies and these 5 cities. I got to make choices. So should I market just to these 5 cities? And if I'm making that choice, why am I making that choice? What information have I learned about these cities over these other 200 cities in California that I'm choosing these cities to do, to market to them? You know, your marketing plan has to include the research that went into figuring out how do you make the decision who to do business with. And that there's all kind of websites that we can go into on a much deeper level. This is a webinar in itself, how to market your business to the government and how to figure out which government you want to market to, i.e. cities, counties, the state of California, or the federal government. But once you make that decision, then you got to be very narrowly focused on that entity or agency. It talks about prime contractors and other small businesses. That's another opportunity that you also want to consider, right? Should you just be focusing on larger construction firms or large hotels, if that's the industry you do business with, or large engineering firms, or companies like Northrop Grumman or Boeing, or other airlines, or some of these companies that receive billions of dollars from the federal and state agencies to do these huge projects, and then you become a subcontractor that's working continuously because they're always busy. So that's another opportunity. It talks about establishing relationships, attending expos, doing the matchmaker event and conferences, all will put you face-to-face with decision makers, whether it's these prime companies or it's the government buyers or managers within these agencies. I'm a huge fan of being an exhibitor. I had a small business, operated it for 20 years. And in that 20-year period, I did many different times. I was an exhibitor. So I didn't just go to the expo as an attendee. I got a booth. It was always of value. It always produced more than the cost. Now, it didn't happen overnight, but the leads that I generated and the relationships I was able to create and grow started because I was an exhibitor who, when you exhibit, you have the ability to capture their attention for that 5, 10, 15 minutes that they stop at your booth and they talk to you and ask good questions, and you're able to share a lot of information, and you build on that. Matchmaking events, they're usually a lot shorter, anywhere from you get maybe 2 minutes to 10 minutes to pitch to a buyer. And within that 10 minutes, you're explaining what's great about your company, your past performance or your expertise, and how you can truly be of value to that agency. And then they share with you what kind of services and products they're going to be needing in the next 6 to 12 months. And conferences, they kind of do the same thing. Participating in trainings also gives you access to buyers. Social media, when we talk about social media, the only one really is LinkedIn. LinkedIn has become the de facto social media site for government entities and for prime firms, regardless of the industry. If you have a LinkedIn account and you want to find the buyers or managers within any of these agencies we talked about, my bet would be they would be listed on LinkedIn. The small business representatives, these are the individuals who were hired by the government to be that middle person between the buyers of the government and the managers and the vendors or the businesses that are trying to do business with those managers. When you have a hard time finding the buyer or making connections with the buyer or the managers, the small business specialist or small business representative, or another name is small business advocates, they're the ones that are charged with helping you reach those people. And on the same side, for the managers and the buyers within the government, the advocates or the representatives help them meet their quota, meet their goals. So if they're supposed to be reaching out and doing more business in the, construction industry, right? They have a budget of $100 million and they haven't used any of that to do business with local or small or disabled veteran businesses who are in the construction industry. It's the advocate's job to help them find those businesses. And then, of course, the dynamic small business search, which is managed by the Small Business Administration. And we kind of already touched on that. Any questions about this page and marketing to the government?
I do not see any questions right now.
Okay. So where to find these bid opportunities? This is just a short list, but this is a very good list. This is the heart of it all, right? Without you having to pay for a service. These are the things that you can do on your own, just utilizing your time and the internet. So local agency websites, they always will have a procurement page listing their upcoming opportunities or the current RFPs or RFQs or projects that they are looking for vendors to bid on. And then the prime contractor websites, they do the same thing, right? Any of these large companies that consistently are doing work for the federal or state or city or counties, they're going to be posting their opportunities for subcontracting opportunities on their website. Excuse me. And then, of course, Cali Procure, which is the California state website that lists all their opportunities under events. And sam.gov is where 80% of all federal contracting is posted. And the reason I say 80% is because for small purchases, 10,000, 20,000, maybe up to 50,000, they probably won't be listed on sam.gov. They have other avenues to list those smaller contracts. And then there are certain entities, like you may not see the NSA listing contracting opportunities on sam.gov. You may not see certain Pentagon things on sam.gov. But most of all of our federal agencies list all their contracting opportunities other than what I just listed on sam.gov. Now, acquisition.gov is the site you want to go to find out the forecasted projections for what they're going to need to buy, whether it's service or products. That's where you want to go. And of course, it's broken down by the agency. That's also a great site to find the small business advocates or representatives within that federal agency. Oh, and by the way, acquisition.gov is just for federal. The state of California, they have their own system of providing forecasted projections, but for the federal government, it's acquisition.gov. And then Builders Exchange on the construction side is a great tool for future forecasted projects. And then of course, Norcal, we have our own bid match service. So we can set you up with our bid match service for free. And on a weekly basis, you'll get notified of upcoming projects or RFPs based on your keywords and certain NAICS codes. Any questions before we get to the summary?
No questions right now. I see some questions coming into the chat. If you could put those in the Q&A, then we can address them the next time.
Okay. So to summarize, here are the 10 steps to success, right? You want to determine if this is the right thing for your business, right? And to do that, you have to really do some research to make sure that the government purchases your service or product. And for the most part, the answer is probably going to be yes, except in those cases if you're a restaurant or you're selling like luxury items. But based on that one little snapshot you saw of the prison industry, they purchase so many things. Applying for PTAC services to help you really get started, complete the getting started checklist, get certified. Definitely the first thing you really want to do before you start making contact with any entity, whether it's prime companies or any kind of agency, is get your capability statement done and have a website that has a government page attached to it. You also want to start networking, building relationships, and really marketing and doing the research to figure out who you should do business with, and then start making those connections, locating these bid opportunities, and then just keep trying. One of the questions we get asked is, how soon can I expect to win a contract? And of course, that's not a straight answer. I can't say within 2 months, within 3 months. You also can't say it's definitely going to take you a full year for you win your first contract, because everybody's situation is different. It's based on your business's expertise. It's based on your own personal experience and relationships. It's based on how well you're able to build relationships. So there's so many factors that go into play. There is no one answer on how long it's going to take. Yes, it could take a year, but it could also take 30 to 45 days. There's examples for both. And if there's no questions, I'm just going to go to this page. And I believe, James, you're going to take over unless there's questions.
Yeah, I'll take over either way. Let me just see if I got any straggler questions in the chat here. Someone's asking about business plans. PTAC doesn't assist with business plans. That's according to our funder charter regulations. We're not allowed to help with business plans. Certainly, you do want to have a good, strong business plan. You can work with your small business development center. That's another economic development network across the country. You can just Google your county or your area SBDC, Small Business Development Center, to find your local center, and they help with all sorts of aspects of business plan creation, things like that. So that's certainly something that they'll be able to help with. And if you work with a PTAC counselor already, we can do a referral to get you over there. If you work with Norcal PTAC. And right. So
can I include, while we don't help with the actual business plan, we can help you with figuring out how to market to the government. Once you understand where you want to focus your attention, right? We have access to databases that we pay for. And so we're able to do, really good research on your behalf and share that with you.
Yes, and that's absolutely true. We can help with just about everything else, and marketing is going to be about 80% of what you end up having to do if you want to get your first contract anyways. Someone else mentioned SCORE. SCORE is another network, economic development network that can help you with business plans. And then there's also the WBCs, the Women Business Centers. And believe it or not, it's not just for women. You can also get help with your business plan from the WBCs. And I know that there's one in Oakland, there's one in San Jose, and there's one in Redding, Shasta area. So definitely a lot of opportunities available for folks that can help you. All right. Great. Sandra's asking, what do you assist with and the price? Sandra, could you clarify that question? If you mean Norcal PTAC, we're a nonprofit service. We don't charge anything for our services. Maybe you missed the beginning of the presentation, but we assist with all sorts of things related to government contracting. All right, well, now we're getting a ton of questions come in. We are right at the time to end. If you want to contact Thomas, you can apply at norcalptech.org. You'll see that on the page here, and then request him as your procurement specialist. You can also email the info line here if you have a one-off question, and our admin staff will direct it to see if we can get you an answer. If your Noah's asking, your business is outside of California, who should you work with? PTACs operate on the criteria of where your business is headquartered. So if your business is not headquartered in California, then you should apply for whatever PTAC covers the region that it is headquartered in. So it's not based on where you do business. Because imagine you could have a business that's headquartered in Tulsa, but then they do business in every state. So they have 50 different PTACs. There should only be one PTAC for every business. So if you're in our service area, apply for ours, but we are happy to send you along to other PTACs as well. All right, let me just talk really briefly about some upcoming events we have. Lenny, being one of our other procurement specialists, is going to be putting on a webinar on the historically underutilized business zone, or the hub zone certification. That is a federal contracting certification that is sort of unique in that it's based on geography. Not based on the demographics of its ownership. So a lot of portions of our service area, Norcal PTAC, a lot of the rural north is in a hub zone. So if that might apply to you, then please take a look. It's really easy. You can just Google hub zone map and find if your business is located in hub zone. And then Thomas is going to be returning on July 7th for another webinar, the local contracting webinar, an ideal first step in the government marketplace. So he mentioned a little bit about that today. This is going to be his chance to dive in deeper for all of you if you were curious about local contract. We did get a lot of questions, and we're going to be really excited to welcome Josh Altieri from the Alameda Housing Authority, who's also going to be presenting on their agency's needs and how to do business with them as well. So it'll be a good example of a good local agency that you could do business with. All right, thank you so much, and we'll see you at future webinars. So thanks, Thomas, for all the research.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. And just a reminder, everyone's going to be getting the slides as well as the video recording. And feel free to reach out to us at info@norcal.
Have a great day.
Thanks.